The United Nations represents 193 member states, but the person who leads the organization will ultimately be chosen by 5 nations. The Secretary General speaks for the entire world on issues such as climate, war, poverty, human rights, and international security. They manage a global bureaucracy of tens of thousands of employees, and they're expected to drag nations to the same negotiating table. It is the hardest job in international diplomacy and politics. And right now, 5 people are competing for the position. It's one of the most extraordinary races in the organization's 80-year history. This time, nearly every serious candidate comes from the same corner of the world. 4 of the 5 are from Latin America, 3 are women, and 2 historic milestones are within reach simultaneously. And the process that will determine whether either one of these happens plays out almost entirely in secret. How it ends will tell you more about how global power actually works than almost anything else that's happening in the world. Before we get to the candidates, we need to understand what they're competing for, because it is not what most people assume. The Secretary General of the United Nations isn't the president of the world. They don't command armies or pass laws. What they have is a platform. It's the ability to shape what the world pays attention to put issues on agenda, to be the voice that can speak above the fray. They're also running a massive organization, tens of thousands of staff, peacekeeping missions, agencies covering everything from nuclear safety to refugee protection to women's issues to children in conflict and the environment. The current Secretary General is Antonio Guterres of Portugal. He's held the job since 2017, and his second term ends on December 31st, 2026. The search for his replacement is already underway. Now, here's where the process gets interesting. There's no election. The Secretary General is technically appointed by the General Assembly, where all 193 member states have a vote. But the General Assembly can only vote on the candidate that the Security Council has already approved. Inside the Security Council, 5 countries hold the veto power: the United States, the United Kingdom, France, China, and Russia. These 5, or the P5, are the real kingmakers. One veto and the candidate is over. Doesn't matter how qualified the person is, doesn't matter how much support they have from the other 188 countries. In practice, it works through a series of secret straw polls inside the Security Council. Each member votes encourage, discourage, or no opinion on each candidate. The polls run repeatedly until one person emerges with broad support and critically no P5 vetoes. That name then goes to the General Assembly for a confirmation vote. That vote is essentially ceremonial. The real decision has already been made behind closed doors by the 5 countries. So why is this race so dominated by Latin America this time around? The answer is one of the most powerful unwritten rules in international politics. And like most unwritten rules, it reveals more about how institutions actually function than anything written down ever could. Nothing in the UN Charter requires rotating the Secretary General between regions of the world. No formal requirement, no binding resolution, but over 8 decades, an informal expectation has hardened into something close to iron law. The job should cycle through the world's major regional blocs. So no single region locks up the position permanently. When we look at the history of the Secretary General, the imbalance is stark. 4 times, Europe has held the job. Asia has held it twice, Africa twice, Latin America only once. From 1982 to 1998 by a Peruvian candidate over 40 years ago. The near universal expectation this cycle, it's Latin America's turn. But layered on top of that is a second pressure, one that has been building for decades and has reached a peak this race. In 80 years of the history's organization and 9 secretaries general, the position has never been held or led by a woman. Not once. 3 of the 5 current candidates are women, and the push to finally change that from advocacy groups, European governments, and a significant bloc of member states is the loudest it has ever been. 2 historic forces converging on a single race. Latin America's long overdue run, the first women at the top of the United Nations, the tension between those 2 things, and whether the process can honor both is what makes this contest unlike anything that has come before it. 5 people have been formally nominated as of May 2026. Here's who they are and what they stand for and what is standing in their way. The first candidate is Rafael Grossi, 65, an Argentine diplomat and someone who has been Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency since 2019. If you followed the war in Ukraine, you've seen him. When Russian forces occupied Ukraine's nuclear power plant in 2022, Grossi traveled to the facility to negotiate safety protocols. He's been at the center of nuclear diplomacy involving Iran, and he speaks 7 languages. And he was the first candidate nominated in this race. Argentina put his name forward on November 26, 2025, one day after the process officially opened. His core advantage is straightforward. He's a known quantity to all 5 permanent members. In a race where one veto ends you, being someone that Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Paris, and London can all live with isn't just an asset, it's the whole game. And on prediction markets, that calculus is reflected nearly. Grossi is said to have been sitting at 55% of support, which is a commanding lead. The uncomfortable subplot is impossible to ignore. In a race defined by historic pressure to elect the first woman Secretary General, the frontrunner is a man. His supporters argue that P5 viability and proven competence matter more than symbolism. His critics say that framing, prioritizing acceptability over representation, is exactly the thinking that has kept a woman out of the job for 80 years. Both arguments have force. That's what makes this complicated. The second candidate is Rebecca Greenspan from Costa Rica. If Grossi represents the security and technical side of the UN, Greenspan represents its economic conscience. She currently leads UNCTAD, which is the UN Conference on Trade and Development, the body that is focused on trade and investment and on economic development for the world's poorer nations. Before that, she was second vice president of Costa Rica, the first woman born in the country to reach that office. The daughter of Polish Jewish immigrants, she has held senior roles at the UNDP and led the Ibero-American General Secretariat. Her argument for the job is rooted in a single premise. The United Nations' relevance to the Global South depends on whether it can actually deliver on economic promises such as debt relief, trade equity, climate adaptation, not just broker ceasefires between powerful countries. She believes the organization has spent too long measuring success in declarations and not enough on outcomes. Widely seen as the strongest female candidate with a realistic path through the Security Council, she sits at around 20% on prediction markets, which is a distant second to Grossi, but genuinely in the race. The biggest name in the race, and the most complicated story, is probably Michelle Bachelet from Chile. Bachelet was president of Chile twice. She ran UN Women. She served as the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Her personal biography is extraordinary. She was imprisoned and tortured by the previous dictatorship, forced into exile, and then returned home to lead the country. In February 2026, she was jointly nominated by Brazil, Mexico, and Chile. Then within weeks, it fell apart. Chile inaugurated a new president, José Antonio Cast, who is a hard-right leader and Bachelet's political opposite. Cast withdrew Chile's backing and declared the candidacy unviable, and also instructed Chilean embassies to stop promoting her. Bachelet is pressing forward with the support of Brazil and Mexico. But running without your own country's endorsement is a serious wound. And it raises questions that don't really go away easily. There are reports that also the United States has signaled resistance, and in a P5 veto system, that may be decisive. She sits at around 8% on prediction markets. Her supporters argue that stepping back would mean surrendering to exactly the forces that the United Nations was built to resist. But the arithmetic is hard. The fourth candidate is Maria Fernanda Espinosa from Ecuador, the most recent entrant and potentially the most strategically interesting candidate in the field. Espinosa was nominated on May 12, 2026 by Antigua and Barbuda, making her the first candidate put forward by a Caribbean nation, with 39 small island developing states holding seat in the General Assembly. That backing carries more institutional weight than the geography might suggest. She has served twice as Ecuador's foreign minister, once as defense minister, and from 2018 to 2019, she was president of the United Nations General Assembly. Only the fourth woman ever to hold that position. Her career runs through multilateral diplomacy, indigenous rights, and environmental policy. Her pitch is deliberately unromantic. The UN doesn't need more lofty ideals. It needs an organization that prevents crises before they detonate, rather than scrambling to respond afterwards. She's also been the most direct of any candidate in addressing the organization's looming financial crisis, a problem that whoever wins this job will have to confront from day one. She entered late, so the question is momentum, but her combination of institutional knowledge, Global South credibility, and Caribbean coalition support is something none of the other candidates can replicate. The fifth and final candidate on the list at the moment is Macky Sall from Senegal, the lone candidate from outside Latin America, and the embodiment of a competing argument about whose turn it really is. Sall served as president of Senegal from 2012 to 2024 and as chairperson of the African Union from 2022 to 2023. He was nominated by Burundi, not his own country, which itself reflects something about the complex regional politics at play. His candidacy rests on a straightforward challenge to the Latin American consensus. Africa's claim is just as strong. The continent has 54 UN member states, the largest single regional bloc in the General Assembly, and hasn't held a Secretary General position since Kofi Annan's term ended in 2006. That is nearly 20 years. Sall has real governing experience and genuine international credibility, but the informal consensus this cycle has tilted heavily toward Latin America, and the crowded Latin American field hasn't opened a clear lane for an African alternative. He sits at 8 to 9% on prediction markets, which is a serious figure in a race where the geography is working against him. Stepping back from the candidates for a moment, what does this race actually reveal? Three things. First, the United Nations is in real trouble. Not philosophical trouble, financial trouble. Guterres has warned of imminent financial collapse. Member states are falling behind on payments. The United States, which is the UN's largest funder, has grown openly skeptical of multilateral institutions. Major programs are facing cuts. Whoever wins this race isn't walking into a position of strength. On the contrary, they're inheriting a crisis, with a shrinking budget, a fractured Security Council, and a world that is testing the organization's relevance in ways it hasn't faced since the Cold War. Second, the process contradicts the institution's own values. Since 2016, the selection has become more transparent. Public hearings, open dialogues, published vision statements, and so forth. Candidates now make their case to member states directly, but the outcome still comes down to the 5 permanent members of the Security Council. And those 5 are more divided right now than they've ever been in decades, over issues such as the Ukraine, over Gaza, over the Iran-US-Israel war, and basic rules of the international order. Finding a candidate all 5 can accept when they can barely agree on anything else is less a diplomatic exercise than an exercise in finding the least objectionable option. That is a strange foundation for the world's most important diplomatic job. Third, the gender question will define how this race is remembered. 3 of 5 candidates are women. The pressure has never been greater, and yet Grossi remains the frontrunner because the logic driving his candidacy is cold realpolitik. He's the person least likely to draw a veto if the process produces another male secretary general. Despite the strongest female field in the organization's history, it will force a reckoning that goes beyond this particular race. Whether the United Nations selection system is structurally incapable of delivering the representation the institution publicly claims to champion. The straw polls haven't started. The final decision is expected later this year. And in the closed-off world of Security Council politics, frontrunners have been toppled before, sometimes at the last moment, by dynamics that never become fully public. But the stakes of this race are clear. Latin America making its case after 40 years of waiting, the strongest push for a UN Secretary General in the UN's history, a global institution under genuine financial and political strain, and 5 permanent members, as always, deciding in private. The question we're sitting with isn't just who wins. It's whether the result will reflect the aspirations of 8 billion people or just the lowest common denominator of 5.